Awesome.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome to another gaming interview. And I'm your host, SINISTERTARHEEL. And like I said, we'd like to welcome you to the gamer section. And without further ado, I'm not going to waste any time. We're going to go ahead and introduce our guest, Laughing Golem. Go ahead and tell us everybody about yourself.
Hi, I'm Laughing Golem.
All right.
Um, I'm a video game developer and a college student. I started developing video games, I'd say, about 3 or 4 years ago. And right now I'm working on Earthwind, which kind of started a little randomly, but it's essentially a passion project based on paper drawn. It's basically a paper drawn platformer that's very heavily inspired by the Zelda series.
Okay. And of course, that's going to lead up to my next question. Is what got you into gaming?
I've been playing video games since I was young. When I was a little kid, when I was like 3, 4 years old, I started playing on my dad's Nintendo 64, particularly Ocarina of Time. I could never get anywhere in the game, but what really got me into gaming and game development specifically as well is I got a guidebook for the game, and it showed all the maps and stuff. And so I started wanting to make my own maps and stuff. And then eventually that transitioned into me eventually going on to learn computer science type stuff to be able to code. So that way I could eventually make my own games. And it's just something that I've always wanted to do since I was young.
Oh, that's great. Oh yeah. Do you have any favorite games growing up other than Zelda?
Um, Off the top of my head, I did really enjoy Mario Kart 64 as a kid as
Right.
well. I love Minecraft.
Right.
A lot of people love Minecraft.
Right. Okay.
Factorio.
Uh-huh.
A lot of indie games too. I loved. I didn't really play too much of it at the time, but Fez is a really great game. I'd say creator has his own stuff going on, but the game itself I love. And I'd say beyond that as well, I really enjoyed Super Meat Boy. Um, yeah, a little bit of Halo as well. Growing up with the Xbox.
Right.
Yeah, just all over the place.
Yeah, because my nephew he loves Minecraft and things like that. But yeah. But other than that, tell us about more about Earthwind.
Yeah, so it's a 2D hand drawn some platformer where I actually draw the stuff on paper and then I actually scan it onto my computer. It's a bit of a process, but I think it gives a good look. And essentially, it's kind of like an analog. Like it's a how do I say a take on the Zelda the Zelda formula. I don't know if you're too much interested in that stuff, but if anybody listening, if you look up Mark Brown, he has a series called the um, it's Boss Keys, and the first season goes over all of the different sort of dungeon layouts and stuff of the Zelda series. And for me, I feel like dungeons are very important. And basically, the game you go through, and there's different dungeons and such that the player is going to be able to actually enter and explore. And I guess it's kind of a different take as well in the Metroidvania, where a Metroidvania is more just one huge sprawling
Right.
continuous thing, whereas with Earthwind, I want it to be more simplified on the surface area, and then the actual dungeons themselves will be more, how do you say, like where it's more complicated, like little mini Metroidvanias. And
Oh, yeah.
so
Just
that's essentially the core.
okay, like a little dungeon crawling and things like that.
Yeah, like little different dungeons you can go through and crawl through, but then also like an overworld with different little towns and stuff, which actually will be impacted based off of what you do in the dungeons.
Okay. Yeah, I had a chance to check out your channel. I seen you did like different videos, like your developments, like you know, for those out there, you might have like share what your knowledge of it, like your journey, like the process, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so it's just always been kind of a weird process, especially like for me, I love bigger projects. Like one of my first projects I ever did was Pipeworks, which is it's a kind of a small game, but it was my first real big dive into it, and that took 8 months. But I guess a lot of it is also personal. It's mostly just I'd say the biggest part of like game development is just being able to like keep yourself going and motivated, because a lot of people in the game development process they like want to say they start looking at different projects and stuff because potentially they don't see this one that they're working on as being I don't know all that good now that they're in the deep and thick of it of actually getting through it. So yeah, honestly, the biggest part is just like motivation to keep going, which
Right,
sounds I know that sounds cliche, but
right.
just being able to keep learning and keep pushing is the biggest factor I'd say in game development. Um, from
Okay.
my experience.
I mean, in your opinion, like, what do you think are the pros and cons when it gets like to game development?
I'd say, well, I feel like it's kind of a double-edged sword of some stuff. Like one of the pros I'd say is you get to do a whole bunch of different stuff, but a con is that you have to do a whole bunch of different stuff between coding, sound development. How do you say, especially for indie development or solo development, I should say, where you're working mostly alone, is you have to create all the assets and code yourself. So there's a lot of that. And then on top of that, if you want the game to actually be able to be a commercial success, you're going to also have to do a lot of marketing, a lot of things like that, where you also have to focus on a lot of the business type stuff going on, which can be a pain, I would say, especially
Right.
if you're also focusing on all the other asset development. But I'd say as long as you work in like a team of some sort, even if it's just like a partner working with you on the side for one particular part, I feel that can help a lot as well. Um, so yeah, I'd say a pro and a con is how much work in terms of the variety you have to do. I'd say a big pro is just being able to make like your own sort of little world come to life, especially depending on why you're making the games.
Right.
Um, and then another con, I'm trying to think of another con off the top of my head. I guess just the amount of work and how volatile the industry is, to where you're likely there's like
Yes.
a lot of different people. It's a huge ocean of games out there, and it's super hard to actually like get your name out there. I guess similar with how YouTube can be as well, from my experience making YouTube videos. It's just such a big marketplace where there's so many people going on, and it's easy to like kind of get drowned out.
Right. Because I know you want to try and make yourself well known, try to stick out, like draw people like to your projects and things like that, and of course, marketing, that's another big thing because you got to go out and promote yourself, like promoting your product. You want people to draw to your product. It's like you're trying to explain it's like, hey, this is my product. This is all about. Trying to you basically try to sell your product. And you're like trying to sell yourself, like basically trying to sell yourself, like more than you talk about it. Of course, you want to show about it. It's like, hey, this is what it looks like. You want to show your actions, like instead of like blabbing it out, things like that. Um, and speaking of that, what do you find like most difficult? I mean, besides like the game development part, you found like doing like the coding, the music, or the marketing part, things like that. Anything that jumps out at you, you find like that's the most challenging out of everything else.
Off the top of my head, with the Earthrealm, the game I'm currently developing, I guess the hardest part for me right now, I would say, is honestly probably all the artwork I have to make for it, just because of the way that it is being made.
Hmm.
Since I have to scan it in and such, and it could be a lot harder because I could be like a lot of games like Cuphead.
Yeah,
Yeah, Cuphead. In that game, how they have it like sprite by sprite, the animations. If
right,
I had gone down that route, it would be like that too. Whereas with mine, I kind of like put it together like puppets, almost you might say, where it's like
right,
different parts where it moves, kind of swings along instead of sprite by sprite. But even then, there's a lot of artwork I have to make, and then on top of that, there's also making sure that the file sizes aren't too big, because with the way that it's a very detailed project, there's a lot of optimization that kind of has to go on there as well, in terms of shrinking stuff down a lot and making sure that the file size doesn't get crazy big just because of how detailed the sprites can be at times. So a mix of actually making the sprites and then actually making sure that they don't like break the game
right.
um, could be a part of it. Yeah, the hardest.
Yeah, because I can imagine the render time. Because like once it's pretty much done, you're ready, like trying to get it out, and like um, usually what you worked on so far, like how long does the rendering take? Like,
I'd say not actually too long. I'd say maybe like a few seconds to load it in, and then um, there is a bit of freeze time in between, but it's mostly just like loading in the level, and then once you get past that point, it's good because it just loads in everything with how Unity works. Although I do want to potentially see about for bigger areas if I can how do I say, like prevent some things from being shown unless the player's in that area, just because of how big it'll be.
right,
So I haven't had too many issues with that yet, but if I do go into making bigger areas where the player can kind of like freely run around, I might start running into more of that. And
right.
so that isn't an issue yet, but it very well could be in the future.
Okay. Like break down like the presentation that you want to, what you're doing with Earthwind. Like, does it have like an open narration? There's like cutscenes that tell like you're progressing, like things like that.
Oh yeah, there's not any like narration, but one part I really want to be in the game is to have like cutscenes, kind of like almost like I said earlier, like I was inspired by Zelda. How there's like a lot of in-game cutscenes in Zelda games where that kind of like really makes it feel like a proper story. I would say I don't know about official. I don't know, just that feeling of it being like a bigger story. So right now, one of the biggest things as well is just animating a lot of actually, yeah. Now that I'm thinking about it, animation's probably the hardest part. Now that I actually think about it
Right.
again, because of how the hierarchy system works in Unity. But back to the point, yeah, there's going to be a lot of cutscenes in the game that I've been working on. Those take a long time, and I have a lot of work to still go into the ones that I've already made. But that's there's definitely going to be a lot of cutscenes in the game just to really make it feel cool.
Yeah, because I know it's tough, like trying to like you got your narrative and now trying to animate, trying to animate it out, just to explain, the progression of the story, going from point A to point B, that things like that. And then, of course, another part is like the graphics. Uh, a graphic, how does it look like? You want to like, is it inspired by Zelda? Is it like pixel like? Because I know you explained about file size. You want to try to keep that file size down, like especially like how you're designing the game.
Yeah, so the game, I want it to look like it's like straight, like basically like it could have just been drawn all together. How do I say that? Like I want it to look like it all came from paper, since it did
Right.
come from paper, and I just wanted to like really look like it really was like hand drawn and handmade together, and just it's kind of inspired by how the Wind Waker how do you say the Wind Waker not fan art. I think the concept art was put together and such for that game, where it's like a lot of
Right.
thick lines and such. It's not the exact same look, but it's kind of like a mix of that and the kind of darker, sort of still fantasy like nature of Twilight Princess, except if you turn that into a cartoon. Like
Right.
if you ever look at any of the Gorons in the Twilight Princess game, they have a kind of funny look to them, where it's almost a mix of kind of realistic but also cartoony.
Right.
I Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to put that. I know a lot of it goes back to Zelda. It's just like a slurry of different ideas from there. But
I mean, mhm.
yeah,
I mean, Zelda's just that game. It's always been like the ultimate inspiration for a lot of people. And of course, like when Wind Waker, because I never, seen that years ago. Like even though it's an awesome game, it's just the art style is like it kind of reminds me of like something I saw in the Looney Tunes back then. Just that animation style.
yeah, their release of that after releasing Ocarina of Time and how that was more realistic. That was really controversial.
Right.
I was just a kid when that released, but I mean, I liked it probably because I was a kid. um, but yeah, I like the style of that. But I know a lot of people feel that's more controversial. So the Earthern, it's going to be a bit more, not adult, but I guess maybe a bit more mature. But
Right.
the sort of thick lines and the strokes from that game, in terms of the concept art, I think I still want to kind of keep some of that, just because it's visually satisfying to me.
Okay. Because usually when I break things down, times like to go by presentation and of course graphics, which you explain in great detail. And of course the other part and another important part is the gameplay. Like explain what the gameplay like.
Oh yeah, the gameplay is gonna be like I'd say there's gonna be kind of a loop where the player will actually start off where they get to see a town that's abandoned, because in the game story, a town is actually going to be abandoned until the player revives that area by going into the dungeon. So the player gets to sort of see what the world looks like in a sort of destroyed state in a particular region, and they have to try to navigate through that, and potentially there might be like little miniature mini bosses that could be in that area, in the sort of wide open areas where the player hasn't yet freed from the dungeon. And so the player goes through those areas and then they enter the dungeons, which can be somewhere in between like a mix of very intricate or very straightforward. And then a lot of them will have like a mix of puzzles and like just straight combat, with at least one mini boss and then one sort of actual big boss. And I want them to be kind of similar to like Shadow of the Colossus, where they're huge.
Yeah. Oh
Because
yeah.
that's another inspiration for me. I love Shadow Colossus.
I mean, yeah. Who doesn't like large bosses?
Yeah, the player won't be able to like climb on them, like cling on them, but I am potentially gonna experiment with letting the player be able to jump across certain ones and such. Like one, I want there to potentially be is going to be a huge one that flies through the sky where you have to like be kind of like hugging the side of it as if it's like a wall.
Right.
Like yeah, kind of like how people wall jump and such, where basically you have to kind of
Right.
hug onto the side of it as it's going down and up, and
Right.
you have to shoot at it with the player's weapon. But yeah, just a lot of mix of puzzle and combat would be this core of it. And then once a player revives an area by defeating the dungeon, which is kind of part of the story as well, the sort of town will be revived, and then there's going to be at least one sort of element that is linked to that will actually be revived across the entire world.
Right.
Like for example, there's going to be a water sort of a dungeon that the player will be able to go to and free. And when they do that, it's at the very top of the world, and then water will actually be able to go across the entire world afterwards, and it will cause like different changes in the gameplay and such of like different areas could unlock, and potential secret areas could be forever lost if the player never found them before. Although on that part, I'm not sure if I want to actually have that or not, because I don't know if players would like that.
Right.
But yeah, just a lot of different things would change across the world where it really feels like the player is doing actually has meaning. And not just one specific thing in one region would change, which, I mean, that's good on its own, but I feel like there should be something across the entire world that changes with each dungeon as well.
Yeah, because I mean, it's like creating exploration instead of like doing something linear. You can always like you choose your own path, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and there is actually going to be a bit of choosing the story for the player as well. I don't want to delve into it too much because a lot of it is up for change just depending on like the scope of the game, depending on if I'm able to make it to the scope that I want to. I am potentially going to have it in the game as well, where the player can make different choices in the dungeons to where they can side with a potentially good or bad ending. Like potentially like a good or bad ending where they can essentially like a Zelda game, but you could potentially side with Ganon instead of that. But
Right.
there isn't this, it's not the same sort of thing, but just like as an example of like, yeah, you could potentially side with Ganon and take over the world or whatever, or you could, free it. So I want there to be a bit of that as well, because I feel that would help make the game more unique. And I think there could be some fun story twists as well.
I mean, it's cool. I mean, see, like from what you were explaining, it seems like the game has like some replay value because since you mentioned like the ending and stuff, like depending on the choice, because it seems like you want to see it from both views and how it goes, which is really cool. As for the combat itself, is it going to be turn based or is it like going to be action, like action RPG, just going and just hack instead of waiting your turn to to attack your monsters and things like that?
Oh yeah, it's gonna be more hack-like because the player's main weapon is gonna be a staff where they can shoot off like a projectile from the staff, and so it'd be very action-oriented in that regard. It's kind of like the original Zelda games in that regard. How except instead of a sword, it's a projectile weapon, which can also be used in puzzles as well, which I think would make it more interesting. Because the projectile that the player shoots from it is actually shaped like a gear, and it could potentially lock into different locations within the game to potentially act as like, I guess, like a power source for different mechanisms and such. And so yeah, it's going to be very action oriented.
Oh yeah, because like something like easy access, right? I think that's really cool. Things like that. Yeah. Before we move on, tell us the medium about your name, Laughing Golem. Where did that come about?
If you must know the truth, it started when I made the channel. It was originally a Minecraft gaming channel, and it just sounded cool at the time. And it was essentially just a really random name, but I kind of like it now because Laughing Golem kind of makes me think of like a game developer who's like not necessarily died inside, but like worked themselves to the point of becoming a robot, but they're like having a joke about it. So I just kept it because of that. But yeah, it just kind of stuck because if you go back on my channel and look far back enough, there's actually some Minecraft videos.
Okay, that's cool. Oh yeah, like just to finish up on Earthwind, what platform do you think you want to release it on? Like,
from my past experience, I'm probably going to be releasing it on Steam just because I have actually released a different video game on Steam before. And it gives a lot of you get a lot of eyes on your game if you release it, even if it's a small game. Like with one game I released in the past, it got I think it was at least 10,000 impressions. It might have been 100,000. I'm not sure, but it gets a lot of views on Steam, and for a relatively low price of it's only $100 to poster, which is a relatively big sum, I'd say, but not relatively actually small for like a big sort of actually like a whole game studio to have to pay or something. And so yeah, for now I'd probably release it on Steam, but if it is successful enough, I'd love to release it on like say the Switch. Although I don't know if that would happen. It really depends.
That's all I know. It feels like it's one of those risks you want to take. It's like, and you figure it's like, hey, if Nintendo probably looks at it, it's like, hey, it's a big thing. Like maybe someone like one of the players, like, hey, I like to play this on the go. You can go to different platforms other than the Switch or the cloud. Or I mean, just possibilities are endless.
Yeah.
Things like, but other than that, about your first game, like that you mentioned at the beginning, what was that gameplay like? And graphic, kind of break it down for us.
It was a platformer where you couldn't jump. It's called Pipeworks, and essentially the gameplay is it's a little complicated. Like the story is a little complicated, but basically your whole goal in the game is to repair a little coffee factory as a tiny little robot where you're essentially tasked by evil overlords to undo the work of a rebellious employee who's trying to take down a huge capitalist system, like a huge factory system that had, and it's actually ran by like little how do I say, like there's a chinchilla, a guinea pig, and a ferret that run it. It's a really weird, it's a really weird little game. It's a pixelated game as well. It's a very pixel art like.
I mean,
Yeah, it's a bit.
It's like it's something like you seen in the 16-bit era, like Super Nintendo, Genesis era, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a fun little game, but yeah, it's just kind of weird.
That's cool. Oh yeah, like right before we close out, like, do you have like any other games that you want to you should have like in the works other than Earthwind?
Other than Earth, I'm not working anything right now, but I've had a few smaller games I made in game jams. One that I made at my college university was really fun that I worked with a team on. It's called Bug Bite, where you had to kill bugs to bring back to your family by nighttime so you could survive in an apocalyptic scenario. Um, and then there's a few others, like Pipeworks. Actually, that first game I made started off as it started off as what you call it. It started off as a game jam as well, and then I made another little game just to kind of showcase game design for a presentation I had to do to a small group for about 45 minutes. Yeah, nothing else super notable. Just a few game jam games. But right now, what I'm working on towards is Earthwind, and that's my big thing.
Okay. Do you have like a timetable that you want to release it?
Right now I don't know exactly how long. I'm thinking honestly probably like 2 to 3 years from now, but I'm hoping either by the end of this year or at the start of next I will have a sort of a really polished up prototype demo that people can play alongside a Kickstarter. So that way people can see the full experience of what I'm going for. But then the actual development time will just depend on how much funding I might get. I don't need a crazy ton of funding, but I do need some. Just like for supplies and publishing costs and potentially advertising, depending on how much people want the game.
Right.
And also, yeah, it also will depend because if I do get a lot more funding, I am planning on adding in potentially extra dungeons and such that would not be in the base game that I will like. Basically, yeah, that I wouldn't originally have added, but I'll add in if I get enough interest in the game. So it really is just variable based on how much support the game gets.
I mean, that's cool means. Like, seems like you want to create some DLC depending on how, like, how the game is going. Like, say if it does go well, it's like, I can, expand upon it, like, creating like some DLC, probably an extra character you want to use, things like that. It's just depending how you want to, the way you want to go it.
I won't do anything involving like little loot boxes or anything because I have morals. No, okay, that's kind of a controversial statement. I just don't like loot boxes and stuff. But in terms of DLC, if in the future, I think that'd be really cool if potentially to make like extra dungeons beyond what I have in my initial vision and such that wouldn't have even been in the how do I say the extra support thing because I don't want to potentially monetize the initial idea in the sense of I only want to add in the extra stuff for free that I initially wanted in the full scope of the game. So it'd be only stuff that I really consider after publishing the game, just because I don't know, I just wouldn't feel right to like I don't know potentially hold off content just for that. But yeah, I think that could potentially be cool to have some DLC in the future. But I would make sure that it is fair to the, and make sure that it's like fairly cost too. And I don't want to swindle anybody.
Right. Yeah. I'm checking the chat. Seeing we got a question. Is it some Clay Rock Studios? Is it for PC and Android?
Um, it's gonna be for the PC and probably for Mac as well. Hopefully Linux. I don't know if Unity does Linux or not, but probably not for Android or iPhone because just the fact that like the file size and such with the art style, I don't know if it would work well or not. Although honestly, I might test just to see. Although I don't know if people would be interested on on that platform, but honestly, I might actually consider that if it runs well.
Sounds like you want to run a poll or something like that. If it's like, spark any interest, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, right now the advertising agency I'm working with, Worth, they're actually running polls. I don't know specifically what's in them, but I might ask them in the future if they could run polls for me based to see if people would be interested in this on the sort of Android and iPhone platforms because those are valid gaming platforms. It's just I'm not sure whether or not the game would work on it just due to the file size.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all said and done. And I appreciate you, interviewing. Before we close out, and just want to give out your outro and where anybody can find you out.
All right. So my outro. If anybody wants, they can look up the studio on LaughingGolemStudio.com. It's a website with all the information that you'd really need there. I do have a Discord as well. That you could find that on there. And then I have my YouTube channel, Laughing Golem. If anybody's ever interested, you can look me up there. Just look up Earthrend on YouTube, and you can also find me. I think I'm one of the top searches there, and you should be able to recognize my face in some of the thumbnails. And I do have an Instagram. It should be Earthrend Game, where you can find some of my stuff there. Although most of that is just me trying to promote the actual YouTube channel. So the big thing is if you want to see me, just look up Laughing Golem on YouTube or go to the website, the Laughing Golem. LaughingGolemStudio.com.
Okay. Well, that's said and done. This is Sinister, the gamer section. And of course, you can follow me on my social medias. And of course, you can see it right there on the screen, like Kunship19 on Twitter. Also, Sinister1019 on Instagram. And of course, that concludes our interview. And appreciate Laughing Golem, giving us a detail about his project that he's working on. And of course, tune in to our podcast Sunday and same time, same channel, like 5 o'clock Central Time, 6:30 Eastern. This is Sinister of the Gaming Station, and that concludes this interview.
It's good to be here.